Hi everybody. 2017 was a very good year for video games. It was very good. A lot of great games came out. A lot of good games that could have been great with maybe some tweaking, but were still worth playing. A lot of good stuff came out. And I think it's one of those years where so much comes out that a lot of stuff gets lost in the shuffle. And I think so many cool things were tried, and there were so many experiments and different ideas and different types of games out there that I wanted to just kind of put together a video with my thoughts on a lot of them. This is more for me than anybody else, because I'd like to come back to this in a few years and see if any trends start based on some of these, or if we can see the industry shifting in any sort of way. I just think it's cool to make something like this and then come back to it later. I'm saying that because, you know, I might say some stuff that people disagree with. I don't care. You're not going to change my opinion. I'm willing to talk about it if you want to comment about it. I'm just putting this out publicly just in case people want to talk about it or share, obviously. But just so you know, I don't like Breath of the Wild, and you're not going to change my mind about that. Also, I hate video editing, so this is going to be super raw. There's a heater going on in the background that you might only hear at certain points during the video. I recorded this at different times. I don't really care about making it all match or whatever. This is a one-off video. So also, just so you know, this isn't going to be any kind of like in-depth analysis or reviews of games. It's just kind of general musings and thoughts and what I felt about the game, kind of, you know, months removed from it. So if you want to look more into these games or a more in-depth analysis of the gameplay or, you know, the story, stuff like that, this isn't the right video. It's just kind of more what these games did and what they represent. Also, if a game you wanted to see is not in this list, I didn't play it. Some stuff just didn't interest me. Persona 5, Final Fantasy 15, all that stuff. I'm sure they're great. I just didn't really care enough to play them. I'm not really a huge, you know, JRPG fan, so that might be part of it. But I'll be playing it maybe in the future. Oh, Nier is another one. I definitely do want to get around to playing that. That's been on my list for a while, but other stuff has just come up. So it will not be on this list. Sorry. So what we're going to start with are the games that I liked, but I didn't really love this year. These are games that I think did some things really well, and I really wish that I could have loved them, and a lot of people did love them, but I think they just kind of missed the mark in one or two aspects. And I've got another list later on with games that I really loved, and then my top 5. But these are games that I think just, you know, just inches off. You know what I mean? Just got a spare instead of a strike. So let's get it started. Nioh had super fun combat, but it was way, way, way too long. It got the feel of Dark Souls right and actually added a lot of stuff to the combat, but it didn't get the heart or, I don't want to say this, but the soul. Running out of stuff to do, things to see, and enemies to fight means a repetitive, brainless slog through copy-pasted environments. I feel like the developers knew this, which is why they added all that loot stuff. They added all these different weapon types and a million different things. It comes off very Diablo or Borderlands-esque, but all it really does is make the game very humdrum and less memorable. There's a serious lack of variety in this game, and because of that, it just kind of drags the entire game down with it. The bosses are cool, but really everything else is kind of lackluster. I did end up beating the game, but it felt like it was more in spite of itself. Part of the magic of Dark Souls is coming across new enemies and environments and NPCs. Nioh has some of that with these boss fights that you have against sort of these respected battle warriors and samurai, and honestly, that's really cool. I love the 1v1s that they had in this game. There was so much to the combat, but honestly, there was so much lacking in terms of environment detail and new stuff to keep you sucked in, and just to keep it compelling. It just got really boring really quickly. Very good game, awesome combat, just maybe less of the same. Everything about Night in the Woods screams pretentious cult indie hit, which is my shit. This game kind of snuck up on me, and it was only a week before its release that I got totally sucked up into the vibe. I watched the trailer a bunch and got sucked into the art, the music, the tone, everything just seemed right up my alley. But then the game came out and it was just kind of okay. It's a very slow-paced slice-of-life style game that is probably best sipped and not chugged. You want to play it over the course of a week or a month instead of just blowing through it over a few nights like I did in terms of streaming. I feel like the game had a lot to say to some people that weren't me. Like, I don't know anybody like May, and I wouldn't really care to. I don't like her. And that kind of pulled out the cornerstone from the rest of the game. If you don't like the protagonist in a game like this, you're never going to get invested. It's not that I'm not sensitive to this stuff. May's anxiety over growing apart from a group of friends that she had since childhood and now seem to be outgrowing her, that elicits sympathy, but May never really won me over, and because of that, I never really cared. I only identified with her friends when they were really embarrassed of her, or they didn't really like what she was doing. Of course, they always came around because they knew this chick since childhood, but I don't know her. I don't like her. I don't know, man. Maybe I'm just too old and divorced from the struggles of a post-college malaise, but something about the game's insistence on constantly navel-gazing and wondering about itself, it really irked me. I wish I liked it more, but what can you do? Breath of the Wild was my first Zelda game. I did not like it. Alright, let me rephrase before people jump down my throats. I got 15 to 20 hours out of it, which is more than enough for the asking price in my opinion, but ultimately I just got super bored of exploring the world. Look, wandering and exploring these bland, open, empty environments isn't fun for me. If the combat was good, that might be another story, but there are no actual rewards for fighting pretty much anything other than the possibility of a maybe stronger but still ultimately breakable weapon at the end of enemy camps. I just didn't see the point of actually fighting anything ever. The combat itself I didn't really like, and even if I did, going to enemy camps and beating through all of them with a weapon that's ultimately going to break just for the chance of maybe getting a slightly stronger but sometimes even weaker weapon, that wasn't fun to me. Without any kind of level up system or skill tree or anything like that, I was just fighting for the sake of fighting, which wasn't good. It kind of reminds me in how Paper Mario Color Splash, how you had to use cards to fight things, and then at the end, like, maybe you would get another card, but why would you ever fight to begin with if you don't know if you're getting a card at the end? You don't know how good the card is. What's the point of even wasting them? You know what I mean? Like, what's the point of fighting any of these things if you don't know what you're getting, or if the reward isn't going to be as good as what you're using to get there? That was the basic problem that I have with the game, and why I never really got into it, I think. I guess I can understand why people like exploring in this game so much, but honestly, the world of Zelda has never just been that interesting to me. I've never really cared about it, and so meandering through its mountains and valleys for hours on end with nothing to do just really got boring. So since I didn't like the exploring, and I don't like the combat, all I really had were the shrines, and while they were kind of fun for a little while, they all just felt kind of gimmicky, and I got bored of those too really quickly. I just don't really get what's so great about the game. I don't get it. It just felt like an above-average third-person open-world game for me for the Nintendo set. The big reaction to it honestly made me wonder if Nintendo players even played other games like this, because it just felt so blah to me. But maybe it's because so much of it is predicated on actually being interested in the lore of the sandbox you're actually playing in. Either way, I didn't like it. There's a really good climbing mechanic, though. I really like that. That was way better than hopping up cliffs in Skyrim. I hope more games adopt that. I forgot this game came out! I feel like there's no criticism you could levy against a Banjo-like platformer that would be more biting than calling it boring. But that's what Yooka Laylee is. Don't get me wrong, I still 100% it, but that was less because it's a fun game and more because I have an almost compulsory need to collect them all. Lots of people that are more involved than me, they've already talked about this game ad nauseum, so I won't waste your time, but there's pretty much nothing about this game that wowed me. It just felt very paint by numbers. It was a retread of an old genre. I just never really got into it, and I don't remember much from it, other than the casino boss, and that was not a good memory. Fuck the casino boss. Holy shit, I am so tired of games not telling me their stories. There's been a trend in the industry for the past few years where games treat their main characters like NPCs, just dropping them in a game's world without any explanation and forcing them to piece stuff together themselves. I guess it's a design choice that came from Souls games, but the cynic in me thinks that devs just realized it's way easier to tell rather than show, and Outlast 2 just did that. The game story is actually very interesting, and it would be very compelling if I actually knew what it was. It has a really cool story locked away within, like a sunken treasure chest in an ocean of foamy piss. In order to actually get at the thing, you have to find all the letters and read all the notes and collect all the eggs so you can even have a shot at piecing together this absurd non-chronological mess of a narrative. This works in like some games where the player character is supposed to be non-consequential to the plot, like in Souls or in another game I'm going to bring up later. But in games like these, it just pisses me off. This is a single-player, first-person experience. Let me be part of the fucking thing. I know part of the story is supposed to be me being in over my head and coming into this world all on my own, but I would rather actually see stuff that happens instead of just being told about it. The worst part about this is that I think we're going backwards. BioShock had these optional audio diaries that were kind of supplementary. They filled in empty bits of the world for explorers while making sure that everybody got to play through the important beats throughout and made sure that you were not left out. On the other hand, Outlast 2 opens up with questions and only leads to more questions. It's like if Grunty's fun facts in Banjo-Kazooie were central to the plot of the game, and every line of dialogue that came from the Good Witch was nonsensical and interpretive. I'm just so sick of games doing this. I paid you my money. Fuck you. Tell me a story. I don't know, maybe I'm just entitled. ARMS is a heartbreaker to me. Honestly, the core gameplay here is incredibly fun. I loved it. It's definitely divisive and some people are going to get bored instantly, but honestly, I ate it right up, and I'd probably still be playing it even now if it weren't for the weird choices once you get outside the ring. It really does feel like ARMS was trying to strike this delicate balance between a legitimate competitive fighter and a casualized fun party game. It was walking a very thin tightrope and it just fell off. The moment-to-moment gameplay is fine, but honestly, some of the choices that they made make it really hard to have any kind of legitimacy to the game. Some of the stuff like the party room is super fun, but ranked mode doesn't really make any sense. When the game first came out, you had to beat the story mode on what basically is the game's normal difficulty to be able to access ranked, which basically cut the online player base in half for no reason. That requirement is gone now, but I feel like a lot of people dropped the game after about a few weeks or maybe a month of playing, so they cut their player base online super quickly. What's extra weird is that apparently everybody bought this game, but in ranked I always just end up fighting the same 5 people using the same 3 arms over and over, and I'm forced to either pick the arms myself or vastly outplay them to be able to stand a chance. Apparently the game tries to prioritize people close to you, so if you're on East Coast, it tries to find East Coast players, lower latency, make the match better and more fun. I get that, but that still doesn't excuse only having such a small pool of players for, the millions of people that bought this game. It doesn't make sense to me, and I don't have fun fighting the same 5 people over and over. I don't know, maybe it's just my opinion, but I think Nintendo really could have had a cult hit on their hands, but the customization for me was a bridge too far. I think it made the game more about optimization instead of playstyle. It's honestly just kind of a shame. The game ends up picking up the meta arms and using those to your advantage. There's very little in terms of variation. I'm just not about it. This might be among my biggest disappointments of the year, honestly. Like I said, the game itself is awesome, but so many of the decisions around it, it don't really make sense to me. Makes having an offline community super hard, too, since you have to be able to unlock the arms on every single Switch. I don't know, just a lot of weird things. With Pyre, Supergiant did it again with a game I'd much rather be watching or listening to than actually playing. The characters are varied, the world is engrossing, and the announcer's hoity-toity performative cadence might be the best voice acting I've ever heard in a game. Seriously, it's so good. The actual game there, though, beyond the visual novel sequences where you talk to your band of merry men and find out more about their lives in the world, it's seriously dull. It feels like something that would be on the Xbox Live Arcade in 2006. People have said it's kind of like NBA Jam or like an arcade basketball game, but it doesn't have any of the spectacle of it. There are some cool animations, but honestly, the gameplay just felt super, lame. Pyre sucked me in with its cast and kept me engaged throughout with its super cool save your friends but lose them or keep them suffering with you in limbo. That's a super cool conceit for a game. I loved that. But the game itself, the sport around which the world is built, it never really hooked me. I never got into it. I kept expecting it to kind of, up in complexity or to attach new rules to it or to be more interesting, but it never really hit that note for me. I'm sure for some people they're going to love it, but for me, I didn't like it. It's interesting because I felt the same way about Transistor. I really loved the look and the atmosphere and the feel of the game, but the gameplay itself I wasn't really a fan of. Bastion I loved both, but it was much more straightforward, so I don't know. I appreciate Supergiant for experimenting, but I'm not into it. Ruiner was a really fun game, but it maybe had a little bit too much window dressing for its own good. Really, it's just your standard twin-stick shooter, but it'll do its damnedest to make you think otherwise. There's a really cool hub world, and there are some awesome character designs and a captivating presentation that adopts the cyberpunk look, but it leaves out the feel. It's funny that there's not much cyberpunk in this cyberpunk game. Yeah, your character's brain is hacked, and in the ending, it's revealed that you're really nothing more than a clone organ farm contingency plan for your brother, who's actually you. But there's no real introspection here, nothing to be said about man's relationship or dependence on technology, just a lot of killing, which is fine. It was good. It was just good. Speaking of games that are just good, here's Fractured But Whole. It was okay. Boring gameplay, but it was pretty funny. The biggest problem is that there are no real memorable moments. The first game was kind of chock full of them. I do remember that one part with the gay fish and you're escorting Kanye West's mom to heaven during this shitty Flappy Bird game, and okay, that didn't really strike with me. If you're gonna do something really fucked up like that, at least make it funny. It just felt edgy for the sake of being edgy. It wasn't fun. It wasn't funny at all. It just went on way too long, so that kind of fell flat. And again, it's not like I'm offended by that or that I'm personally hurt. It just wasn't good. Same thing goes with the game's pushing of the joke of, oh, look at all these superhero movies and series and spin-offs and stuff. Yeah, I get it. There are a lot, but tell a different joke, man. I got really sick of it. Especially the origin story of your dad fucking your mom. That's not funny. Stop doing that. I guess that happened a lot now that I'm kind of reflecting on it. There are a lot of jokes that fell flat that they kept insisting on doing. The one exception was Mitch Connor. That ending was funny. I don't care what anybody says. I love that. There's not really that much more to say about it. I feel like critiquing these kind of games for the gameplay is missing the point. Yeah, it's technically a video game, but ultimately it's just a playable South Park episode, and with that in mind, I was satisfied, even if it wasn't a great episode. The only things are, I don't really think it was worth $60, and the only thing I'm really going to remember is Kyle's cousin Kyle being so essential to the plot. I love that character, and Captain Diabetes was the best. I think I just need to go ahead and accept that this genre is not for me. I love the idea of Battle Royale simulators, but when everybody gets a gun literal minutes into the game, I feel like a lot of what makes the idea so intriguing is lost. Can you imagine if everybody in Hunger Games came off the platform immediately with an Uzi? That's dumb. I don't get it. These are the most popular types of Battle Royale games, and I definitely think that there's a market for it, but I'm really surprised that they're the most dominant. I actually really love The Culling. That was another Battle Royale type game that came out in 2016. There was an emphasis on melee combat. Yeah, there were guns in the game, but they had very few bullets, and if somebody was packing heat, it was a really big fucking deal. You knew not to go around them. There were ranged weapons like blow darts and bows, stuff like that, but aiming was really imprecise and firing was usually really slow. What this meant is that you had to carefully consider whether or not you were going to use one of your 4 arrows to try to snipe somebody or try to sneak up on him to get an upper hand with a melee weapon. Yes, you kind of do that in PUBG to try to sneak up on people when they don't see you, but really you don't have anything that you're risking if you take a few shots at a guy. Yes, now he knows you're there, but maybe you lost a few bullets, but with how liberally you get them, you don't really lose anything. I just think that these games would be much more appealing with a rhythm of a melee kind of combat game. Something that gets lost when gunplay is involved and you can just get mowed down in 2 seconds by someone you didn't see. And don't get me wrong, I can see why people like these games more. I just can't see why so many like it more. I'm really shocked that this has kind of become the dominant version of the game, but, you know, good on them. That's fine. This is not for me. Alright, now that all the garbage is out of the way, these are games that I actually really liked this year. Just so you know, this doesn't mean that these are objectively better. Like, a few of these are clearly worse games than the ones I talked about before, but I think they did something really cool that resonated with me in one way or another, and because of that, I would like to see more of it in the future, and I'm hoping that these can be kind of jumping off points for, you know, kind of standards that become part of the industry later on. You know, I don't really have much to say about Horizon Zero Dawn. It was just a really super solid third-person open-world adventure game. I liked it a lot more than Breath of the Wild, I can tell you that. I think the big reason for that was the combat, which felt viscerally satisfying in a way that a lot of games try to emulate, but they ultimately fail. Landing hits in this game felt so satisfying no matter what you were using. When I play Breath of the Wild or anything like that, you know, games that fall on that end of the spectrum, I just feel like I'm swinging at air. When I knocked off a chunk of a beast in this game, God, that was killer. Seriously, ripping off the parts of these mechanized animals and using them as weaponry against them is a super cool concept and one that never really got old to me, even when I was getting bored of the game's meandering plot. The combat kept me invested throughout, and while the game, you know, started out pretty strong in terms of story, it kind of petered out at the end, but it's still a really cool idea. The combat just was so satisfying that I never got bored. I think a lot of people are going to kind of unjustly compare this to Breath of the Wild, kind of like I just did, and give Breath of the Wild the pass since it has the Zelda bonus, but seriously, give this a try. This is awesome. Okay, Friday the 13th is awesome. Yeah, it's buggy, and it was littered with all kinds of technical problems on release, but when it worked, oh my god, this game was fun. There's a legitimate tension that this game gets just right that a lot of games don't, and even when it arms you with a million things to keep Jason at bay for a bit, you still feel ultimately powerless at the end of the day, and you're just looking to waste as much of his time as possible. The feeling of having Jason looking inside a window, breaking them out, making sure that you can't get out or have to hurt yourself, and having your teammates try to fumble around and make the most of the time while you distract them, it's really cool. Lots of people complained about Jason being too strong, but it's fucking Jason, you dumbass! Asymmetric multiplayer is a super tricky business because games today have sort of conditioned us as players to expect some affectation of balance, but I absolutely love that this game insisted that Jason is an overpowered boss motherfucker and he will always kill a target provided he spends enough time on them. If Jason wanted to kill you in this game, it was incredibly difficult to get him away. He was eventually going to get you, go through all of your resources, and choke your life out. It meant that your team was going to get away, but you were not. Admittedly, I haven't spent a lot of time with this game as much lately, so maybe it's changed, but it was really nice to see someone give an earnest effort into this kind of game after Dead by Daylight basically took the idea and somehow turned it into a nanny simulator. Seriously, what the fuck is up with that game? Why can't I kill anyone? Why do I have to put them in timeout until somebody else kills them? Who is this for? Fuck Dead by Daylight. I hate that game. I don't really know what I can say about Sonic Mania that hasn't been said a million times before, honestly. They got it right. That's basically it. It's just a very, very, very good Sonic game. Probably the best. Maybe the best ever. I don't know. Sonic 3 and Knuckles or this one. They're both very good. I will say it's super reassuring to have a new Sonic game that ostensibly confirms old gamers' suspicions that retro games could be released today and still find a mainstream audience, basically, that these games can still hang. But I wonder if it's maybe just because so much of that audience is brought in via the nostalgia. I don't know. We can make all kinds of debates, but honestly, I loved it. It's the perfect Sonic game. It was awesome. Go play it. A Hat in Time is a classic example of a game bowing out before overstaying its welcome. I really love it when games opt for shorter runtimes instead of bloating themselves to the gills, and Hat in Time shows remarkable restraint for one of these collect-a-thon 3D platformers. I really thought it was going to be super bloated, but at only $30 and for the gameplay you get here, it's awesome. There are only a couple worlds in the game, and with the exception of one of them, they're all super killer. They all have all these cool ideas and objectives and things that happen. Each one is populated with missions that feel separate from one another. They feel totally distinct. The result is a game that never really dwells too long on one thing and provides new surprises constantly at every turn. It honestly kind of reminds me of old 2D Mario games like Mario 3 or Super Mario World, where games would introduce entirely new elements or mechanics for a single level and then never use them again. You just kind of get to reflect fondly back on that before it gets old. I love the game for that. Hat in Time honestly just kept impressing me with its inventiveness throughout, and kept dropping my jaw with how cool it was going to get, and it ended before I could sour on it, and for that, I love the game. You should go check it out. Little Nightmares is one of those few instances of a creepy game getting their tone right. Not just like creepy for kids or creepy but with the lights on, but whole hog, giant vile monster picking you up and eating you, hearing the crunch of your bones, that kind of creepy. I was honestly worried that Little Nightmares would sort of be the former there, and it wouldn't fully commit to its idea of a small girl in a giant's world where everything is out to get her, but damn it, this game, it doesn't pull any punches. It goes hard. I think the real standout here, besides the awesome character designs, is the sound design. Everything sounds super damp and wet and kind of unsettling. It's really fitting, considering the game takes place on a boat, and it does a lot to make the levels feel super large and oppressive. At its core, honestly, Little Nightmares is a pretty rudimentary puzzle game with some pseudo-QTEs, but the way that they're presented is so well done and horrific that you feel totally engrossed all the same. You'll forget all about it. There's one scene where you're running away from tons of people on a huge dining table. That's masterful stuff. I'll never forget that. I love this game. It's incredible. And finally, we get to the really good stuff. These are my top 5 games of the year. Please keep in mind that this is... I can't believe I had to say this, but this is just how I feel. What's really important to me in a game is how new it feels, because I play a shit ton of video games, and because of that, it's kind of hard to surprise me, and so my favorite games are the ones that kind of come out of nowhere and do that. That's going to put a heavy bias on some of these games. That said, there are going to be some obvious ones that are mainstays that, probably won't surprise you, but keep that in mind before you comment, whatever. Just hear me out on these. I've honestly never really been that into the Resident Evil games. I've always been more of a Silent Hill kind of guy, but that might be just because body horror always freaked me out way more than zombies. But do you want to know what I love more than both? Cannibal redneck families. That is my shit. I love this trope. I'm sure you've already heard it all about RE7, about how good it is and how it redefines the genre, blah, blah, blah. But it really can't be understated. This game feels like an old survival horror adapted for the Amnesia generation. It combines the best of both worlds into something that feels totally all its own. I really enjoyed how they handled this game. The story is pretty standard Resident Evil fare, which is to say that it's total nonsense and doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But for what it represents, as in an honest AAA effort to redefine and re-innovate, and some would say revive the survival horror genre, it lands here in my top 5. I really loved this game. I have a lot to say about Observer, maybe more than any other game on this list, and that might be because it's probably the least popular and least well-known, but hear me out on this. I don't really jive with most walking simulators. Like, I'm all for unique narratives and stories being told at the expense of gameplay. That's fine with me if it's justified, but very few of them provide any good enough reason to not have anything to do other than just hold W throughout the game. Observer is the exception to that, and because of that, it lands at my number 4, because I think it really represents what walking simulators, if you want to call them that, can do in terms of storytelling and narrative building. I mean, this game it's incredible. First off, the game really goes whole hog on the cyberpunk aesthetic, but it does so in a refreshing, confident way. It never gets really caught up in itself or how cool it is, or it tries to impress it upon you. Instead, it opens with this interesting concept. You're this guy searching for his son in an old derelict apartment complex, and it really flows from there. In terms of scale, it's honestly a pretty small, self-contained story. I mean, the main character is a really cool idea in that you're this detective that can hack into people's brains and go through their memories. That's super neat. But honestly, it's pretty small scale, and because of that, it's able to unfold on this guided tour of these cyberpunk tropes, and it's a little unstructured. Like, in one moment, you'll be debating the pros and cons of cybernetic augmentation through an apartment door with a couple that, don't believe in that sort of thing. and then you'll be wondering about the ethics of virtual reality on animal life the next. The game's themes begin to avalanche as it comes to its conclusion. It starts to kind of pick up the pace, which kept me guessing on how it was going to resolve itself until the very end. Some might think that lacks focus, but I found it super refreshing. I consider it kind of an alternative to Soma's story, which is super hyper-focused on the migration of consciousness. That shtick does get explored in Observer, but it's pretty quick, and it honestly makes you think it's going to go in that direction at the ending, and then just throws you for a loop. Of course, this game is flawed, and my biggest gripe with it was the voice acting. I know there are some cool nerd points to be earned for getting Rutger Hauer to voice the protagonist, but dude, he's 73 years old, and he's also Dutch. I don't know if that had anything to do with some of the line readings sort of feeling a little off or falling flat. It's one or the other, one of those two things. But either way, I never really was able to buy into his performance. Also, the whole hide-and-seek sections of the game sucked. A lot of people have kind of lamented about this. I guess they kind of felt obligated to have some sort of immediate conflict in the game, and that comes in the way of some Amnesia tier hide-and-wait bullshit that you've been playing since 2010. You know what this is. But these sections don't last too long, and it's never really awful enough to be a huge issue. Again, it's kind of like in Soma, where it feels like an obligation almost, instead of something they actually wanted to do. And really, in a world where 90% of video game endings fall flat, I give Observer super points and a ton of extra credit just by sticking the landing with these two finishers that provide super fittingly satisfying endings to this awesome story. Both endings feel very satisfying, even if they're not necessarily good endings. In terms of, something good happening to the player. I think both close on a super noir kind of ending, and they were super awesome. One of the best endings I've ever seen in video games, frankly. Really, the game wowed me on pretty much every level, despite being, what someone could just call a walking simulator. And because of that, it's in my top 5 of the year. I definitely want to go back and play this once I've forgotten more about it. But those endings, oh gosh, those are unforgettable. Originally Mario Odyssey was my number 2 of the year, but after some time spent away from the game and after some reflection, I think it's pretty comfortably in my number 3 spot. Don't get me wrong, it's a masterpiece. Nobody's arguing that, but it didn't resonate with me on any level beyond just being a good Mario game. Don't worry, I didn't really take issue with its hundreds of moons or relatively small world size, though I get why many people would complain about that. It's great, and it's certainly innovative in its approach and how, they give you a million things to find instead of just one. I don't really mind that. But for as new and exciting a fresh take as Mario can be, it's still just Mario. It's bright popping colors and gameplay first design. There's not really much more new to experience other than, finding new ways to jump and bing wahoo. And the gimmicks, while they're fun, they just feel like shallow carnival games. You put the ring on the bottle, you get a moon. You get the ping pong ball and the goldfish, you get a moon. And Mario games have never really been about saying anything meaningful or being much more than a bright, shiny toy, which is totally cool. They shouldn't be. But for me personally, a game's overall experience, the vibe, the atmosphere, the je ne sais quoi of the thing is so, so important. Odyssey felt like this joyful celebration of all things Mario, but it's an experience that I've tread before, and yes, I love it every single time, but it's a very familiar feeling. You can kind of change up the formula as much as you can, but really you're just jumping through hoops. Mario is still my number 1 Nintendo series, and I still do love the game, but there were 2 games this year that totally felt new and wowed me to a level I've never felt before. I wanted so badly for Hollow Knight to be my game of the year. Not just for its gameplay, which will hopefully set the bar for Metroidvanias for the next few years. I think it's the best Metroidvania to ever come out. It's better than Symphony of the Night, better than Super Metroid. I definitely think so. And not just for its presentation, which I think through its masterful art direction and score somehow balances this somber, aloof tone with moments of joy and humor. I wanted this to be my number 1 because of what it represents. My favorite games of years past have always been made by single people, just by a small team, because they're focused, refined visions of worlds and stories that are so perfectly realized and unapologetically unique that they captivate the player and they don't let go. There's no market testing here. There's no focus group. There's no boardroom. These guys tell a story and they own it all the way to the end, and I think there's something to be said for that. It's the reason that I loved Lisa, it's the reason that I love Undertale, and it's the reason that I love Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight's magic is effortless. It creates these compelling landscapes within the universe without even really trying to, it feels like. The atmosphere and vibe is just evocative in a way that transcends anything nice I'd be able to say about it. I can't really articulate what makes Hollow Knight so special. It's just one of those experiences that you have to play for yourself. And with that said, I acknowledge that it's not really for everyone, and it does have some flaws. The game starts slow. It'll take a couple hours before you can even unlock the first movement ability, which is kind of a shock if you play games like these. There's a ton of backtracking too, which will pad minutes if not hours of your gameplay time with tedious back and forth through hallways of respawning enemies, only being able to fast travel to a couple places. But the reason that they're not that big a deal to me is because all of these gripes feel like choices, not oversights. The game has a very slow build and forced retread, but it feels like a way of familiarizing you with a totally unique world that it looks to build. You become intimately familiar with the tunnels and walkways, and eventually traversing just becomes second nature as you learn the area, and you become one with it. It's something that I haven't really experienced in any other Metroidvania before, but in the end, I do have to relent that as much as I love the game for what it chose to be, it doesn't mean that I always loved it for what it did. After a dozen or 2 hours in Hollow Knight's vast expanse, completing the game to 100% honestly started to feel sort of like a chore. I think any other year this would have been my game of the year, but there was one other game in 2017, one that had absolutely no filler, that didn't feel like anything other than total excitement at all times, something that I enjoyed to the very last pixel. I honestly can't find anything wrong with this game. I know it sounds like a total cop-out, but hear me out. As somebody that's been playing games since he was a kid and grew up on these kind of cartoons and played all these richer games that seem to inspire Cuphead, this game is just absolute joy, bliss, perfection. I can't find anything wrong with it. When I talked about a lot of the games earlier, so like Odyssey or Hollow Knight, yeah, they were great, but they had these sections that weren't so good, whether it's Odyssey constantly having to ground pound 800 different times to get the same moon over and over, or in Hollow Knight where I have to retread my steps for an hour and a half to get, some obscure crest. Cuphead has none of that. It is all kill or no filler, and because of that, I think it deserves to be in a spot of its own. Yeah, the run and gun levels are a little uninspired, and they definitely feel half-baked, but they put it in just because people were complaining about it, and honestly, I think the finished product is damn good. I was kind of expecting them to be an afterthought, but no, some of the levels are really interesting, particularly the one in World 3 where you have to run away from the giant. That's something totally unique that they didn't have to put in the game, but the amount of love and care and attention that's been put into every single facet of this game shines through, and even the stuff that isn't so great still comes out as just being an incredible labor of love, and I really can't fault it for that. I have seen some people criticize the difficulty curve, not necessarily the difficulty itself, but the fact that it sort of randomly spikes. But honestly, that kind of is part of the experience for me. I think the thrill of going into a new boss is kind of magnified if you have no expectation of how hard it's going to be. For instance, World 2 has the dragon boss, which a lot of people lament about, and they say it's one of the hardest bosses in the game, and it took them forever to beat. But World 3 has two bosses that are super easy, both the mouse and the actress, and the reason they're in World 3 isn't because they're so hard, but rather because they have all these new interesting ideas, and the theming is super cool. I mean, you've got a Tom and Jerry thing, and then the actress's stage goes through a whole play and stages of her life and ends with a curtain call. That's really cool. And I feel like going into those fights and not expecting how hard it's going to be and what mechanics you're going to see, I think that's part of the joy of unlocking something, and I think it really works in the game's favor. We also have to remember that difficulty is relative, and what's hard for some people won't be hard for everybody, which is why my one criticism of the game really doesn't make any sense, and it's just something just for me. It's not something for anybody else, so I don't really hold any points against it. And that is that, and I'm going to sort of hedge my bets when I say this, and because it's going to make me sound totally self-absorbed and like a normal get-good stereotypical gamer, but I promise I'm not that. I think the game should have been harder. Listen, it sounds like I'm totally feeling myself. I get it, but I'm not. Please hear me out. I play a lot of video games. Expecting devs to balance around hardcore gamers like me is totally childish and alienates new audiences, and everybody should be able to play this game. Cuphead is a game that pretty much everybody should be able to play if they're into that kind of thing. Nobody should be, kind of left out or excluded from this game. I just never really felt pushed to my absolute limit like I thought the game was going to do. I beat the game on normal in about 3 hours, and the only times that I really struggled for an excessively long amount of time were when I was playing for S rank, which obviously provides plenty of challenge, but I wish it came in the form of an absurdly difficult boss instead of just testing me on ones that already existed. I just honestly wish there was some kind of capstone masterpiece boss, something that was sort of infamous and revered for its difficulty and its cool design that kind of pushed the gameplay and animation all the way to the edge and its absolute limits, something to remember forever. And while the dice and the devil fights are challenging, and they're a very good way to end the game, especially the dice fight, which takes inspiration from Gunstar Heroes and all this other stuff. You've got a whole Cab Calloway thing going on, too. It's super cool. I didn't really feel like they pushed it all the way. I feel like they could have gone a little bit more. But, like I said, that's a totally unfair expectation, just to put in more challenge in a game that most people are already having difficulty with. So I don't hold any points against it. And because of that, Cuphead is perfection to me. It is my game of the year, and it has totally stolen it away from other games, which I totally love this year. I think any year that this game came out, it would have been my favorite game of that year. It's solidly in my top 5. I just love this game to death. Anyway, that's my video. I hope you guys liked it. Whether you agreed or disagreed, like I said, feel free to talk with me down in the comments or hit me up on Twitter. I'm probably more responsive there. I don't really use YouTube that much. This is just a one-off. If I didn't talk about a game as much as you would like, I'm sorry. This is already a 35-minute video, even only touching on these games for, a minute at a time or so. So sorry about that. Like I said, this video was more just so I could look back at it. In a couple years, maybe look back at the year that was 2017 and see if we can draw any parallels between, whenever I'm watching it and now. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. You probably won't see anything else on this YouTube in a very long time, because I just don't upload here much. So say bye. Goodbye.